Welcome to the President and CEO podcast series, where every 2 weeks, President and CEO founder Paul Stukel discusses middle market issues with business leaders from across the nation. In this edition, we speak with Christine Poon, Dean of the Fischer College of Business at Ohio State University, and Dr. Anil Makhija, Dean's Distinguished Professorship, Professor of Finance, about Fischer's partnership with GE Capital and the creation of the National Center for the Middle Market.
Chris, why did GE Capital pick Fischer College?
That's a great question. GE Capital, as you know, is one of the major lenders into the middle market. And they began to realize that as important as they have been to the middle market for literally decades, they knew very little about the middle market. And when they looked to academics to figure out, have academics and were they interested in this middle market? Had they answered any questions in the middle market? They realized there was really a dearth of academic interest in the middle market. So they began a search to look for a collaborator. And I think certainly what they liked about Fischer College was the fact that we had a great reputation. We were part of a big public institution, the Ohio State University. And we also are in the heartland of middle market territory. But I think what they really, really liked about us was the collaborative nature that they felt the minute we met each other. We shared ideas, we brainstormed with each other, we made each other better, and each other's ideas got more lift the more we spent time with each other. The chemistry was really excellent. And so, like all things, I think great partnerships start with trust, they start with good chemistry, and they start with people being able to collaborate and share ideas.
How would you define the role of the National Center here at Fischer?
Well, the National Center actually has three very distinct objectives. One is the research objective, which Professor Makhija can talk a little bit more about. The other is what we're calling corporate outreach or executive education. So it was important for GE Capital to think about the center as a way to allow the middle market companies to network with each other, to learn new skills, that would help them advance their companies. And then the third was really student engagement, exciting the students and presenting opportunities for the students to create careers in the middle market.
Anil, if I could ask you, there's obviously a million ways to define middle market, by head count, by revenue, by other metrics, and everyone seems to have a different version of that. How did you arrive at the sort of 10 million to 1 billion market segment?
Well, I think, Paul, you got it exactly right. There isn't any commonly accepted definition of what the middle market is. If you look at the Small Business Administration, they invoke actually different revenue cutoffs depending on the industry. And there's a recent report by Deloitte on middle market firms, and they used $50 million as the lower cutoff. So what our first thought was that this is an issue that deserves research on its own, so where do we begin? So we decided to take a more comprehensive approach to it, taking the largest swath of territory. So we went from 10 million to 1 billion. Now, of course, we knew that we had taken a more comprehensive approach. So we subdivided this, and we also looked within it to 10 to 50, 50 to 100, and 100 to 1 billion. So in that sense, we catch a bit of what I might call small-like behaviors, as well as some amount of large-like behaviors. But hopefully we are catching at least the middle somewhere.
The nature of your ongoing research, has that been plotted out yet? I mean, are there periodic reports that you plan to be issuing, those kind of things?
Yes, we very much hope to do so. Let me back up for a moment and point out that the research that we had done under the leadership of Chris here included some findings that were in fact quite surprising. I might start by pointing out that the middle market turned out to be an extremely important segment of the economy, about 1/3 of the non-government GDP, 41 million jobs, and I could go on about the importance. So we want to continue to explore some aspects of the role of the market. But we also discovered some characteristics of this market. What are these characteristics? They were heterogeneous in terms of ownership patterns, in terms of the revenues we were talking about, in terms of the industries they occupy and so forth. So that also was literally the tip of the iceberg. We want to know more about the characteristics of this industry. And finally, we discovered that there was a group within this that during this last difficult recessionary period actually grew very well, was exhibiting a 10% growth in the recent past and was predicting 10% growth going forward. We called them our growth champions. And we found that they had some distinguishing characteristics. Better customer focus, investment in innovation, better management culture, accessing international markets, and workforce management. Yeah. So one of the things we are doing, more to your exact question, is that we want to do white papers on these characteristics because they might suggest some habits for other middle market firms to emulate.
Chris, can you tell us, is there much interaction with real-world CEOs during, here at the center in the course of the research? Are you eliciting input from CEOs?
The center, by definition, is a center where we believe it's the mix of faculty, CEOs, real practitioners of business, and of course students. We think that is what distinguishes this kind of a center. So it is a center that will do important academic research, but it will also have this role to do what we call corporate outreach, and of course the student engagement piece is important. CEOs will sit on every element of this center, and so that will also be a part of how the CEOs of middle market companies engage in the center.
Okay.
And if I may add to that, I think Dean Poon very correctly points out the active collaboration that we have with the practitioners, including all the CEOs that sit on our corporate outreach board, at the oversight board. In addition, we are also bringing out white papers on the practices of CEOs. So, for example, on the issue of talent management, we have a video and a white paper by a CEO of a local middle market firm, R.G. Berry, talking about talent management. And in fact, we are going to take it a step further, and we are hoping very soon to hold a webinar in which one of our faculty members, who's an expert on talent management, Professor Ray Noe, and Greg Tunney, CEO of R.G. Berry, and an HR expert from GE, perhaps Nancy Abbott, will take this one step further, talk about it in a panel, and invite questions.
That's right. What I was about to ask. Is there going to be a training element at some point in the process so that CEOs can come to the center, or either virtually or physically, to engage and to learn?
Yeah, so as I gave you one example, but we also have an educational set of programs for middle market managers. And this is going to be an executive education program. We hope to offer it in the spring, in fact. It will consist of some 3 days of on-campus programming. It will begin with the foundational review, which will cover strategy, marketing, finance. But then it will do something very unique. Recall the characteristics that I laid out that we have discovered in our research on middle market managers, those distinguishing features of growth champions. So after the foundational coverage of marketing, finance, and strategy, we will go into specialized project-based review of those factors.
Well, I think probably the biggest thing that people watching, CEOs watching, would want to know is how can they get involved or derive benefit from what you're doing, and when is that going to start?
It's going to start relatively soon, and we are very grateful for any participation we can get, because it would help us immensely to increase our insight into middle market firms, and ultimately our purpose is to improve capabilities of this important segment. What are the form of these opportunities? Several. They can help participate, highlight best practices, like the Greg Tunney example. In order to do this confidence index, we hope to build what we are going to call a middle market business leadership council, the people that we would go back to survey about middle market, and in fact add additional questions so that we can also conduct additional research. So we hope that many of them would find the time to participate in that, that they would join us in our webinars. So there are many possibilities as we go forward.
You know, on a more macro level, one of the objectives of joint objectives that Fischer and GE Capital have is that we begin what we've called a national dialogue on the middle market. So this is a market where there is no voice, and we believe that if we can begin to fuel the answers to some great research questions, that we can begin to help shape some of the thinking as our regulators think about the kind of regulations they put forward and how they sort of know how these regulations might affect small businesses. And they certainly know from the feedback that they get from the large companies how various regulations will affect the large companies. But it's this middle market, which is a third of the non-government economy, whose voices are never heard. And so we believe that in regulation, in legislation, in taxation, there are probably a lot of things one can think about to make sure that the effect of these actions at least are neutral to middle market companies, and possibly could actually encourage the growth and the health and the job creation that these companies give to this nation. So I think in a macro sense, that's really what our dream for this center is about.
It's interesting you point that out, because in my research of the middle market, one of the things I looked for without success was associations that address the middle market. I mean, the chamber, there's no middle market element to the chamber, at least to my knowledge. And you know, the National Association of Manufacturers, I mean, you look at these organizations, they have small business, but they don't have middle market. I mean, have you found that to be the case?
Yeah,
too?
I think you very correctly note, I mean, if you think about small firms, deservedly they do get attention, and they have the Small Business Administration devoted to them. Large firms are well resourced, and as you know, that they can afford lobbying, and they're in the public eye. There are some organizations that take some interest, but it hasn't been organized in the comprehensive fashion that we hope to develop in this center. And I think Dean Poon very rightly pointed out that we are looking at research, we're looking at corporate outreach, we're looking at student activities. I think that presents a comprehensive approach to looking at middle market issues. There are organizations like the Association for Corporate Growth, for example, ACG, that tends to pay more attention to middle market firms. But I think the agenda of these three buckets is perhaps unique to us.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the way we have envisioned this center is unique. There are centers in academics that tend to do very, very academic research, very basic research, but usually that research is fueled by the interest of that particular institution's faculty. And there are other centers who are very student, corporate outreach related. So it's really about how do corporations connect with students and create job opportunities and interest of the students in those industries. What we're trying to do is to actually put the best of those kinds of centers together, and as Anil said, to broaden the research interest, because we do not believe that just the thinking of our own faculty will be sufficient to answer the broad questions here. So this idea of an open source innovation, I think, is also unique, that this center not only will fuel the research interest of Fischer and our academics. But any interested academic who has an interesting question, an interesting approach, an interesting idea, they can seek to get grant funding from this center. And the only thing we want from them is to answer the question, get it published, and get it published not only in the very, very best academic outlet that they can get it published in, but to also come back to the center and share their research with the practitioners and with corporate CEOs. So this idea of a center, we believe, is unique, and we're pretty excited about what we can accomplish.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Anil, thank you very much.
Next in our series is a discussion with Andres Rayner, President and CEO of Pros Pricing, a leading pricing technology service provider based in Houston. Thanks for watching.